Most quilters have an even feed walking foot with their sewing machine. Many of them actually think about using it. Some of them do use it, but few quilters use their walking foot to its capacity. These are an incredibly helpful tool that you can use to improve your quilting more than you can imagine. I'm Lea Louise from Inspired Quilting by Lea Louise, and I'm going to show you one thing you can use your walking foot for that's going to change your quilting completely. You're going to be doing more quilting than you know what to do with. You'll be finishing all those quilt tops. That's what I'm doing. Check this out behind me. We're going to quilt a log cabin quilt with a simple design using our walking foot. And you can do this. I can't wait to show you. Let's get started. And here's where this quilt started. It began here with my quarter log cabin, and I absolutely loved it. And put it on point. You see how we've got the triangles along the side, and I think it looked beautiful. And I just couldn't decide how to back it. And then I made this earlier this year. So this was last year. And then earlier this year, I made this one. You can see it's alternating 5-inch charms and then 3-inch scrappy pieces. So it's a great scrap quilt. And I really liked how it turned out. But the low volume almost stood out too much. I didn't see enough color, and I just wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Well, one day I had both of them together, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is perfect. Now, this guy measures about 82 inches square, and this one is only 63 by about 78. So I just needed to add a little bit more on this end over on this side. And it was long enough, but I had to make this 20 plus inches wider, and that took some work. Luckily, I had set the fabric aside for this, thinking that I may want to enlarge it a bit, and it turned out perfect. So this quilt became the backing for this quilt, and what a pair they make. Oh, wait till you see how this quilts up. I think you'll love it. I know I surely do. I am ready to start quilting, and I want to show you a little bit about what's going on here. You'll see I have these safety pins across the top, and what I've done is marked the end of my quilt. I'm using a quilt top that I had made previously and converting it into the backing for my log cabin quilt right here. So what I've done is I've put pins at the top edge of my log cabin. You can see the back end of the safety pin here, so that as I'm quilting, I know where my quilt actually starts. That way I won't be sewing through all that, and who knows, I may have the beginning of another scrappy quilt right there. So I'm just going to do a wavy pattern. This is a large quilt. It's over 80 inches square, which puts it, I'm going to say it's like 82 or 83 inches. So that's generally larger than what I will machine quilt because it's quite large. But I believe that I have a quilting pattern that I can use with my walking foot that's going to be really easy and manageable. Generally, the difficulty with a large quilt is handling it in this area. It can get really bulky. But we're going to see how it works, and I'm going to muscle through it and use this, what I think is an easy pattern. And I say easy because it's not straight. Beginner quilters think, oh yes, I'm going to stitch in the ditch. I'm going to quilt a straight line from here to there. It doesn't always work that easily. Straight lines are actually tough, because as you're sewing along, your presser foot is going to want to, or your presser foot needle, whatever, your hands are going to want to stagger back and forth. And I've had trouble with straight lines. It took me a long time to be able to get it straight. And you know what the secret is? Follow your sewing path, not your needle. Watch where it is you want to sew, and then that's where you're going to guide your needle. If you watch your needle, you're going to be bouncing all over. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But we're not sewing straight. We're going to make large wavy curves from one corner of the quilt to the other. One reason why I like to sew diagonally, besides it being easier and I can just do this wavy quilting, is that I start in the middle and I work to the edge. So every row of quilting that I add, I'm getting closer and closer to the outer corner, which means this part in here is going to be smaller. It'll keep getting smaller as I go, as opposed to getting larger. It's hard when you're quilting and you have to keep packing in more and more and more. So I reverse that and I start with it wide, and what I do is I'm going to take my corner on this side over here and I'm going to roll it up like this. And then as I'm quilting, I can just run this roll right through. And I find that works really well. So what else? I think that's everything about what I'm doing. And that's just why this looks like I'm not quilting the rest of the quilt. I am. It's just the back of the quilt only comes this far. And I have my walking foot in place. Don't ever try a machine quilt without a walking foot. I'm telling you, it makes it so much easier and cleaner, and you just get such great smooth lines because it helps keep your fabric moving the way you want. And I love how it works. I'm just going to tuck that thread in there. Now, I have two new things that I want to show you. I mentioned this in another video, but since I'm quilting, I want to actually show it here. Pre-wound bobbins. Oh my goodness, I thought, what a crazy thing to spend your money on. But what I didn't realize is how much thread you can get on a pre-wound bobbin. And especially for quilting, I don't want to be stopping and changing bobbins. So when I get to the end of my row, I always check and see, do I have enough thread in my bobbin to get through another row? Well, this has so much more. I don't know, you probably can't really see close enough, but these are wound by machine, not just our sewing machine, but a machine that can get nice and straight. It's just like it's wound on a spool of thread. And so you get that much more. And it is a lighter weight. And that's okay. This thread is a little bit lighter weight, but I'm okay. That's not uncommon in a lot of quilting and embroidery, is to use a lighter weight on the back so it doesn't get thick and heavy. This is a new find that I love. And like I said, I was surprised. I thought, oh, who would do that? Why would we do that? Well, this is why. But here's another thing. While I was online, I have never seen these before. This is a super non-stick needle, and it comes in a size 14. I haven't seen it in other sizes, but for quilting, a 14 is fine. Usually I would probably use an 11 or 12, but because this is non-stick, this needle glides so smoothly. I bought it initially thinking that I would use it as, for my embroidery. I do not so much embroidery as, what do I want to say? Not so much embroidery as raw edge quilting. And I have the like steam-a-seam, and sometimes that can get a little sticky and it gets on your needle. Super stick. This is like, like your frying pan. Nothing sticks to it. It doesn't stick. It doesn't grab onto anything. It just sews so smoothly. And I've used it a lot on quilts, like on rag quilts. Not that I'm worried about the, anything adhesive, but because this is a smooth sew with all that flannel and the thickness of the quilt, these are great. Love these new needles. So that's what I have in here. So I have my walking foot, and I have my pre-wound bobbin, and I have my super non-stick needle. So I am ready for action here today. The last thing I need are my quilting gloves. And I use these simply because it makes it easier to hang on to my quilt. My fingers will tend to slip, and if they get dirty, I worry about getting the quilt dirty, but the gloves usually stay clean, and I can just, manage everything so much easier. So let me go ahead and get set up, and we are going to start with some quilting. Like I said, we're just going to go long waves, and I'm having second thoughts about what I'm doing. I want to sew from the front because I need to see my diagonals. And here I had this great plan, but with quilting, at every step you take, there are more ideas that come flooding into your head, and sometimes they're better than what you thought you were going to do to begin with. Okay, so I have my quilt in my lap. I need to unwind it, unroll it, turn it around, and start from the other direction, and I'll show you exactly what I'm doing, this time for real. Okay, and I found another benefit here for sewing on this side of the quilt, and because this is a log cabin and I have it set on point, the lines are going to, my sewing lines, my sewing guides are going to follow along the strips. And so you'll notice as I start in this corner, I'm going to be coming through this strip, and as long as I stay in this strip all the way across the quilt, I'm going to be in a straight line. I love that. And I could be so bold as to, actually do a straight line, but I'm not going there. Wavy is easier, and that's what we're going to do. So let me go ahead and get my needle in place, and we will get started. And I start just off the edge of my quilt. Actually, I'm going to lengthen my stitch just a little bit. I usually stitch at a 2.5, and I'm going to bump it up to a 3. I'm using a low loft cotton batting, so it's pretty thin. And what I'm going to do is just go back and forth, and I'm going to want to stay within this width. These are 2.5-inch strips, so they're sewn finished at 2 inches. So I'll just start right up here. And I want really nice long waves. And while you're setting guidelines for your width, it's not set in stone. These are going to be asymmetrical. Nothing's going to be matchy-matchy next to each other. So I'm just pulling fabric, make sure I have it here. So as I'm going along, I can, turn or meander whichever way I want, and it's not going to have to match up or align with anything else. So just give yourself the freedom to move along as you want. When I stop, I usually try and stop in a seam, only because, okay, there we go. Only because if I bump my needle one way or the other, it's going to be less visible. But always stop with your needle down. That way you don't have jogs in your stitching. All right, let's see. This is the hard part. I always have to remember, was I going this way or this way? So I sometimes have to peek. I say, okay, I was on that side, now I'm coming this way. So you'll find out along the way what the little pointers are that you need to remember for yourself to kind of keep you on line with what you're wanting to achieve. And then I keep my quilt in my lap. I fan fold it, which makes it easy to, there we go, to pull up as we go. And so far we're doing so good. Oops, sorry, I bumped the camera. So now I'm starting with my rolled edge feeding through. And I'm coming this direction. I can't help but hit the camera, sorry. It's really close to where my arms are in the quilt, so I'll try and hit it as little as possible. Now your machine will take care of itself. Your walking foot is guiding the fabric. It's actually drawing the fabric in, because the feed dogs underneath the top here work in conjunction with the ones that are underneath in your machine below the throat plate there. And the fabric is going to go through, and that's why we use the walking foot. It keeps the top of the fabric moving at an even pace along with the bottom layer so we get nice even edges. So you don't want to pull or push, because this is pulling as fast as it can go and keep everything together. If you start pulling and pushing, that's when you can run into problems with getting little tucks or pleats along the way, or stretching your fabric. So just let it go and let your machine do the work, and we're just going to keep moving along here. So what I do is I hold my hands to the outside. Over here I've got a grip, and just to kind of keep the direction that I want going. And then I just guide it, and I don't want to let the fabric in front get too tight, because I want that to be pulled through by my walking foot. I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to get my corner in here. I just need to start feeding that through. And as I'm going, I just make sure everything is nice and flat. And while I'm rolling it over here, I can just feel as I'm coming forward if there are any wrinkles or pulls. But generally, I don't find that to be a problem. So you see how having this rolled up on the side makes it easier to manage. In the past, I just sort of push it all in, and it would be really hard to handle, because there'd be so much fabric wadded up in there. And then on my left side over here, I have my ironing board next to my sewing table, and I have the height adjusted so it's at the same height as my sewing table. So that's where my extra quilt is, on that side. So I have one side rolled up and one side draped over my ironing board. And that seems to work pretty well. It's fun quilting this because there's so many different fabrics, and I just enjoy seeing all the different fabrics that are in this quilt. I love scrappy quilts. Actually, this is going quite well. I'll tell you, the first row is going to be the most challenging, because you're finding your way, number one. You're getting things situated. And as I said, every row you make from this point on is going to have less over here that you need to manage. And it just works out really well. And I do pull little threads along the way. The ones that get tucked in as you're sewing get caught in the seams. And once you get a little more confident in where you're going, what you're doing, how it's all coming together, go ahead and speed up. And then, like I said, just turn your fabric gently where you want it to go, and let the feed dogs take in the fabric as it can. And everything's going to go nice and smooth, and before you know it, you're going to be to the other side. Now, I don't know if you can tell on the video, but what I'm doing is I'm making some curves longer and some shorter. And then on the adjacent rows, I'll decide whether I'm going to follow the same or do different along the way. Kind of, once I get the first line in, I'll get a better idea of what I want to do. And you'll see I don't have any pins in here. I did spray base, and to me that just saves so much time. Number one, I don't have to crawl all over the place getting safety pins in my quilt, but I don't have to worry about taking them out as I'm quilting, because that always took a lot of time. Sew, remove pins, sew, etc. So this is working out great. And that non-stick needle, oh my goodness, it's amazing. And the beauty, it's off camera right now, but right down here, my corner is right where I want it, which tells me I followed the right lines. I got exactly where I needed to be. And I'm just going to end right there in the corner. When I get down to the end, my corner, I'm going to cut my thread top and bottom. And I cut it pretty close. Okay, a good cut. And now I'm just going to pull this back. As I'm pulling it back, like I say, I fan fold it into my lap so that it's easy for me to draw my fabric, my quilt sandwich as I need it. So my lap gets pretty full, especially with a quilt this size. But you can see as I'm going along the way the quilting line and how that works. So I'm going to work at about approximately 2 inches. Now, if you wanted to follow the same dimension, the same all the way through, then what you can do is use a guide, and it'll, as you sew along the line, you run your guide along your previous stitch, and it's going to make the same waves. And, I'm trying to decide what I think. If I want, I'm going to do it that way, because I think for the first time, if you've not done this before, you'll appreciate the lack of decision making because the guide is there, and that's all you have to do is follow. So let's see. I want to go about, let's say 2 inches. I mean, you could go as far as 2.5 inches, but I think 2 would look good. And I think maybe the reason I'm doing that is because I know these are 2 inches wide, and it'll kind of correspond and, I don't know, maybe work better, look better aesthetically. But we'll see. There's no right or wrong, so you decide what you want to do. So I'm going to start, and I start just off the edge. And then as I go, this is what I'm watching. I'm not watching here because the needle and the presser foot's going to go where I want it to. I'm watching the guide to make sure I'm in alignment. And you'll notice I'm not perfect, and that's okay. This does not need to be exactly aligned along the way. I don't have a problem if it's a little off here and there, because that's the nature of a wavy line, is it can be, varied along as you go. But notice how much quicker I can sew on the second round, because the first line is in. I'm just following along with that, and it's just going to make it's a no thought. It's a no thought process, because I'm just going to follow this and just quilt along merrily. And when you start seeing pulls, that means the fabric's not gliding smoothly. So you want to just make an adjustment, start getting your roll into your machines. They call this the throat. There's another name for that, but I just call it that place where my quilt goes. All right, here we go. And the other thing, as I'm sewing, I'm going to be moving my quilt also to this side. As each row goes along, I'll be moving it over and unrolling this. So there is a bit of manipulation along the way, but it's not unmanageable. It's not particularly difficult by any means. It's just a matter of getting yourself in place, and then once we get going, once we get going, we will be just cruising along, and it's going to go very quickly. Now, I'm not going to make that little point in my curve. it looks like I was coming in, and remember I said which way was I going? I should have gone this way, and I went that way. So I have a little V, but that's okay. I'm just going to make this one long curve on this side. And I got a little narrower, but that's okay. I'm making up for the space up there. And I'll just widen back out. And look at that, right to the edge. Finished, well, come just a little bit more. Finished on this side with my second row, and that went so much more quickly and easily. Far fewer times that I had to actually adjust my fabric because it had all gone through before. And just look at how wonderful that looks. And see, that's a nice spacing for machine quilting. And I'm really happy with that. I think it's going to look awesome. Okay. Oh my goodness. There's a lot of quilt here. But you know, it's not difficult to manage. I have it the way I have it, fan folded in my lap, rolled on the side, and supported with my ironing board on the other side. This is going great. I am really happy. This is turning out terrific. And now we're ready to start row 3. And I'll get my guide in place, and I'll start just off the edge of it. See how easy that goes? Now, as I'm adjusting my quilt and bringing it in, I'm also doing a little bit of unrolling so that I have enough maneuverability with my quilt, that it's not rolled too tight. One thing you'll want to watch for that I'm noticing as I'm doing this, as I said, I have my quilt fan folded in my lap. Depending on how high your sewing machine table is, there's a limited amount of space between your legs and the bottom side of the table. You may find that the quilt kind of inches its way lower down into your lap. So just be careful as you're going along that you're not pulling and tugging at your quilt too much, because that could distort it and create creases and stuff on the back that will be problematic for quilting. So if you feel any resistance, just stop and, you know, just lift everything and make sure you're where you want to be. But that's something I just noticed, so I haven't had that happen. And that's because of the size of the quilt. So while this is very easy to do on most any size quilt. When you do a larger one, those are some extra considerations just to keep in mind. All right, row 3 is done. All taken care of. Now what I'll do is continue sewing, and I'll just add however many rows it's going to take to get to the corner, and then once I get into the corner, I'll check back in with you. Because of all the white space, I think the quilting really stands out more on this side. But I just love the look of that. Isn't that pretty? And let me flip it over and show you the other. The quilting isn't nearly as visible on this side, on the quarter square log cabin, because this over here hasn't been quilted, and this has. You can sort of see the lines a little bit. And it's definitely, because there's a lot of darker fabrics, I think the quilting doesn't stand out like it does on the other side with all the low volume fabrics. But just look, isn't this pretty? Oh my goodness. Trying to do this and not get my feet in the way. I've got this laid out on the floor. It's so big. Oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. I'm so excited. I can't wait to show it to you. So I'm going to get the other half of the fabric finished, and then we'll see a quilt. And then the binding. I haven't even decided what to do with the binding. Oh, I got to start thinking about that. And here's my almost finished quilt. It's all quilted, but I haven't had a chance to trim and bind it. Otherwise, this video would go on way too long. So we'll follow up with that at another time. But I just wanted you to see how pretty this turned out. Oh my goodness, it is gorgeous. I have another one coming for fall and maybe Christmas. I'm not sure which it'll be. But at that point, then I will have a pattern to go with it too, and you can see what kind of options there are that you can do to make a quilt like this yourself. And I love that backing. Didn't that come out pretty? Oh, that just looks so nice. I'm really excited about this. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Thank you for enduring all this. This was a long video, another long one, I'm afraid. But so pretty. Lots of gorgeous colors to look at. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day and find something wonderful to quilt. It's been a pleasure being here with you. Thanks so much for being here.